there is something around mindset and attitude, because it's not age, it's not necessarily education either, but it's that curiosity, willingness to sort of lean into the ambiguity and the change that can really help. But I think on the growth side, it's not necessarily sort of putting in a well-known playbook. It's, actually, is there a different way I offer my services? Is there a different way I get seen? In Australia in particular, there is a lot of people that look at someone who's in technology and says, I'm not really a techie, I'm not, I don't know this stuff, and use that as an excuse to not sort of engage in this area. And I think when it comes to AI, that's not an excuse. I've had a couple of clients come and say, yep, we want to get started with our AI. Our exec team wants to know all about AI. No, these people don't want to know about AI. They want to know how to use Copilot or Claude or ChatGPT. Quite interesting. And so now when someone gets in touch, it's like, and are people using this in your organisation? People are supportive of using it, but they're not using it themselves.
Please give me a minute of your time. If analytics are to be believed, you're more likely to be a listener than a subscriber. No, this isn't a plea for your money, but it is a plea for your support, which can be free. The good news is you're already doing the hard part by taking the time to listen to conversations that are consequential. This show is still being built episode by episode, guest by guest, and your subscription and feedback helps me to determine who to invite, what to ask, so we can ensure that we deliver the most consequential content to you possible. So please, take a moment to subscribe on your platform of choice. Thank you for listening. Now, let's get on with the show. Most organisations now claim to be adopting artificial intelligence. Far fewer can describe what they're actually doing it into. The policies and governance frameworks accumulate. The licenses are signed. The announcements are made. The substantive question? What the technology should change about how an organisation thinks, decides, and serves the people in front of it, tends to be displaced by the easier question of how quickly it can be deployed. The result, in too many cases, is a quiet mismatch between the language of transformation and the operating reality underneath it. Clare Kitching has spent her career working in precisely this gap. Trained inside some of the most disciplined analytics environments in global consulting, McKinsey and QuantumBlack, and later in senior in-house roles, including General Manager of Data, Insights and Analytics at Treasury Wine Estates, she has now founded Cambiq Consulting, with a focus on helping businesses of any size get the most from AI and data. Her proposition is, at its root, organisational rather than technological. AI governance, she argues, cannot exist as a paper exercise or a marketing artefact. Shadow AI persists across Australian organisations, not because employees are reckless, but because they do not know whether policies exist or how to apply them. And the question facing leaders is no longer whether to adopt AI, but whether to shape the market before it shapes us. Each of these claims, taken seriously, is a leadership claim before it is a technical one. What distinguishes Clare is the combination: the analytic discipline of the institutions that trained her, the operational scar tissue of having sat inside the executive team that has to actually deliver, and the eagerness to apply both to companies where data and AI have largely been unexplored. Today's conversation is about what responsible leadership of this technology actually requires. Clare Kitching, welcome to On the Subject of Leadership. One of the things I'd like to press into a little bit first, and probably I think many of the engineers and data analysts I've worked with, it's always the bit I guess they find challenging is talking about themselves. And I get the suspicion that talking about yourself was maybe one of the harder parts of going independent. When did you discover you'd been, I guess, outsourcing to the institution to talk about you, i.e., I'm here from McKinsey, and then I guess how did you develop that confidence to talk about yourself a bit more?
Great question, Robert. Do you know what? I actually found that out in the middle of McKinsey when I was practicing to do a lot of talk, getting more out there for public speaking. So getting on panels, doing keynote speaking for McKinsey and QuantumBlack. And, they were very good at saying, let's get a coach in just to, get you really set for this talk. And she was like, introduce yourself. I'm like, I'm Claire. I'm from McKinsey. And that was it. And actually, being forced to then practice introducing yourself, it got better. And so, I got very good at it for talks. But I think coming out of McKinsey, then it was again, how do I talk about me and what I do and what I have done to potential clients and to people that can help me find potential clients and to also not necessarily sell myself, but also show how I can help people as well. And I think that has probably been one of the hardest parts around going independent, but it only comes with practice and sort of sitting back and having the time to not rehearse it, but have to explain it to someone again and again and again, and then reflect, what do you know? And even last week I was having coffee with someone new and she was asking me, and so why did you do this? And what are you doing there? And really having to probe into, well, what is my value proposition? Why am I doing this? What do I want to sort of put out there? It helps every time that you have that conversation.
Basically repetition. And I think sometimes that is, particularly for public speaking, the only real solution, because it's very hard until you've received the feedback from the audience, both their faces lighting up, their faces falling, that you start to realize what phrases, what words are really chiming, which words and phrases are creating confusion. And that literally is just I think a little bit of a trial and error. I mean, there are some things that are known, but I think, the more one talks about one's work, what one does, my life in general, that's what I think creates that fluency. And did you find in that process, I'll term them proxies. It's a little bit of a hobby horse I've got at the moment. I find in particularly more senior leadership circles, it's very much about the proxies, because they're across often very large divisions, so many skill sets and capabilities within it. You can't know the detail of what all those jobs do. So when you're hearing and reading reports, it's what are some of the keywords that are surfacing? What is that, almost that proxy in the conversation? And have you found that in terms of talking about Cambiq Consulting and just AI more broadly, it's about finding the proxies that resonate with your audience?
I think there's two parts to it. It is finding what's resonating with your audience and what they need, but also in AI and data, there are so many buzzwords, and people will put confidently around those buzzwords, and it's really stopping to say, actually, what are they talking about? And I'll give you a good example. I've had a couple of clients come and say, yep, we want to get started with our AI. Our exec team wants to know all about AI. I was okay, great. We could do some education. We do some education, and you start having the conversation, and you realize, no, these people don't want to know about AI. They want to know how to use Copilot or Claude or ChatGPT. And that's quite interesting. And so now when someone gets in touch, it's like, and are people using this in your organization? And you also could see whether people are supportive of using it, but they're not using it themselves. And that's quite an interesting one as well, because how do you help someone realize that actually once they start using it, they'll have a whole different understanding, and then they'll be able to help their teams have a whole different understanding as well. So I think there's this two parts of what do people want to talk about, but when they're saying that, what are they actually asking? And it takes a bit of trial and error as well. And what people are willing to listen to. Too.
Oh, I mean, I've certainly sat through that. I was at a presentation recently, and a consultant came in, and sort of point one was, I'm going to talk to you about tokens. And of course, people in the room were just thinking, no, hang on a second. I've got a budget that I'm trying to sort of resort. I need how do I get Claude to interact with Excel to help me process the numbers? Like the tokens it's using in the background, I don't know. That's probably, the CTO's problem when the bill turns up. For me, I'm interested in my business problem, my output. And I think that's an interesting one around the language. There has become this slight obsession with get to know all the acronyms, understand how the token system works. And it's sort of, how does that help my role?
And I find that definitely writing on LinkedIn, it's actually, what does my audience need to know versus what are the buzzwords? Because you read all this stuff, it's like, oh, that sounds a lot, and this is like but actually, is anyone going to use that? Is anyone outside of, someone counting the dollars and cents? Do they need to know that? Maybe they need to know it at a high level, but actually, how do you tie that back with, their day to day? So I must admit, definitely when I write on LinkedIn, sort of thinking about, okay, what's the concept I want to talk about, but how do I link that to day as well?
No, nice. And so one of the, I guess, changes, I suppose, moving from a McKinsey or a QuantumBlack is you're going from an organizations of tens of thousands of people to a smaller setup that you're running. Were there any things, I suppose a lot of takeaways from big consulting, but were there any things to unlearn given the, I guess sometimes I can be a little bit cynical about big consulting decks, but the real need to deliver outcomes to clients. It can't just be sort of a 6-month exploration of the concept of AI. It's no, actually, we have a legitimate business problem, and you're launching into the middle of that.
Yeah, I would say on the delivery side, there's less to unlearn, because I do think McKinsey is very focused on what are the problem you're solving, what's the value you're delivering, and how are you helping the client. And so I think that that some of that sort of learning is great, and it's ingrained about saying, actually, let's get really, really clear on this problem early on. I think there's a lot to unlearn about what do people actually need, why are they hiring you, and how can you help them in the best way possible? And I reckon the McKinsey sort of training on how do you help people in the best way possible, it has actually been fantastic, because a lot of the time McKinsey, you say, okay, this is what the contract said, but actually I see you need this, so let me also give you this to you as well. And so it's almost that sort of flexibility within some boundaries that you learn, and you realize that's going to give long-term value to people, and that's going to help everyone. I think there's probably parts that, especially with smaller organizations, they don't necessarily no one wants an 80-page deck. And I think that is culturally in probably every single organization. That's not saying people don't need something written down. And I know everyone is like, oh, slides. But sometimes you do need that slide deck or board presentation. And it's good that you can get it done easily, quickly. But also it's how are you helping the person sitting next to you from the team, so that when you leave, it's all fine and continues and grows. So I think it's both easier and more important on the capability building side as well.
And I want to pick up on that point, and I think it's an interesting one in terms of what's written in the contract versus what really generates value for the client. And maybe if I could summarize that as the difference between the delegator and the doer. The person that signs the contract, yes, they have the delegated authority from the board to sign off on X contract to engage Y people, but it's then very much, I guess, over to their team who are doing the doing. And I suppose that's where the rubber hits the road in terms of the solution. So I suppose that's a key element to press into. The things I think you've spoken about in the past are senior managers or executives who haven't actually used AI in their daily life, but they're happy to sign up a consultancy to say, we need Cambiq, we need to bring AI into our organization. You'd sit down with that executive who is, in a sense, signing and drafting the contract, but they've never, forget their organization, they've just never used AI in their life, and their reliance is on their team. So I suppose that potentially filters, does that have a filter or modulate the actual business problem?
Yeah, so it's a great point, Robert. And I think there's two things that happen, well, that I see. And I've seen recently, actually. On one hand, they are really listening to their teams, and they're hearing, oh, we need this. We definitely need top of the range models, because that's what our use case is needed, and everyone wants it. And on the other hand, you probably have teams which don't filter up enough of how they're using AI and what they're doing. So sort of the leadership at once can be like, oh, the reason we're not using AI is because we don't have the right tools. or everyone's using it. It's fine. No one needs training or help. And I think what happens when someone hasn't tried to use AI or have a feeling for what it is they realize, they take at face value, oh yeah, the tooling is not good enough. We need to improve it. But it's like this, tools are pretty good these days. It's not always, if you don't have the best, that you can't do things. So I think there's sort of a reality check then. And then I think on the flip side as well, changing the way you work and getting used to a new tool, be that, hey, you're switching from Claude to ChatGPT to Copilot, like across any of these, it's hard. It takes time. It takes a few weeks to get going, and even to sort of become a lot more productive, it takes a lot of thought to how am I going to use this past make this sound better or draft me this to be able to then sort of have more of an impact in your role. So I think some of the leaders that sort of say, oh no, my team uses it, it's okay, I'm supportive of it. They're not necessarily setting themselves up to make those great decisions around what to do in the future, how is it going to help our business, and how do they chart the path ahead. I think the other side is that, for the next few months, they can probably get away with, oh, I haven't quite used it. But when they're expecting their teams to use AI, and you've got some people who are resistant, I mean, I can see in 6 months' time those people saying, well, my leader doesn't use it. Why should I?
Yeah.
And I think for these people, I see the time, the sort of thought that needs to go into how do I use this in my day? How do I get up to speed? It probably takes less time than you think, but you just need to sort of commit to a couple of hours on a Friday afternoon of going to do it, of saying, I don't know, can someone show me? And then I think you're a bit more on a roll to get started. I imagine there are some sort of senior leaders out there that are like, oh, how do I admit that I actually have not used this and don't even know where to start? So yeah,
what's my login again?
What is it meant to do? What do I do in this part? And you know what? Half an hour, a little here are the 5 tips and tricks. I've sat down with a few people to do that. And then it's like, oh, now I see what's possible. It's going to take a few weeks to then be, oh, now I see what's possible, and it is part of my day to day. But I think to those leaders, just get started.
Yeah, definitely.
You can't put it off forever.
No, very much. I know in the almost a bit of a sidebar, but in the photography space, there's always this saying that the best camera in the world is the one you have with you. I think the old adage, it's no good having something like a Hasselblad if it's stuck at home and there's a beautiful scene in front of you. It's sort of what you have in the moment. And I'm wondering if there's a similar sort of analogy in AI in terms of people pushing for the, what's the bleeding edge model, or I don't want anything that feels consumer. We need an industrial grade AI for our organization. Yet it's a little bit of the camera that you have with you. If you've got a challenge in the moment, and a simpler, more consumer grade AI model would happily help solve that and move the organization forward, I suppose the case can be made that's a great AI model for you and for your use case in the moment. It doesn't have to be intricately built with dozens of engineers over many months as a bespoke platform for the business.
Oh, totally agree with it. The best AI tool is the one you use. And look, I'd say in the last 6 months, things have improved so much, and across every tool. And if we were having this, if you look back to this time last year as well and think, oh, what was I able to do? What versus what I can do now? I mean, now you can get a pretty good PowerPoint through many of the tools, but a year ago you couldn't. But you were still like, oh, okay, well, how do I get some of the things that I need here? How do I get the structure? How do I get it to help me? And so I think now there's probably even more that you can outsource, but I think the challenge then becomes a lot of what you have to do is quite a high cognitive load. it's like, I've got to do some deep thinking about this because how am I going to structure it? And what does this actually mean? And I think actually leaders realizing that and spending time on that is needed, because otherwise their teams will give them something and they'll read it and be like, oh, that's like, there's a lot of words here, but it says nothing. And so how do you sort of train people again to lean into that? Hey, you've got a lot of content. You now need to sort of bring out what are those key points, not using AI, but be able to sort of get something that's really high quality.
And that quality step shift, I think, has been really interesting. I remember some of the earliest PowerPoint slides I tried to generate from AI. It was literally a white bit of paper with some of the text which vaguely associated what I was talking to the AI about dumped on the page. Whereas now you do get these beautifully formatted PowerPoint decks that pop out that you can then download and are fully editable. And the power of that is extraordinary. And that's, from some of the, I guess, simpler models. But also, I suppose, so many of there's been so much product diversification, and yes, a lot of models out there, but I suppose a bit like soap manufacturers, a lot of it's sort of based off sort of some really, really key models that are doing a lot of the driving and the heavy lifting. And as those are sort of being released and made available, you might be sort of 0.1 of a model behind, but ultimately it's a phenomenal product for what it's doing.
Oh, definitely. And you see that with the sort of change in flavor of each major company. And I think, even today a new update was released. So every company's like, oh, but here's a new one. And I'm going to do the best one. And now I'll do the best one. I think if you chase that, the vast majority of people in corporate Australia don't need to chase that.
No.
Some will. But you can probably get comfortable with things and wait a few months to see where it all falls.
I definitely get that in a couple of conversations. People are like, oh, you're using 4.6 of Claude. That's very last week. And it's just, okay, wow. And I get the models are growing pretty quickly, but very much. So with, I guess, client conversations, to sort of wrap up this section, how can you, do you sometimes see when you're perhaps talking to a prospective client, whether they're serious about change, or I'll call it shopping for permission? I think when consultancies are brought in, sometimes I see an executive who's got a very much clear, this is what I really want to do with the business. I know if I bring in a consultant, they're absolutely going to back it and that'll get it over the line with the org or the board. Do you find a little bit of that where they're looking for, I guess, permission or maybe a bit of an insurance policy regarding a decision already taken?
So I definitely see there is a view of how do I bring someone in from outside to talk about this. But I don't think of this in a cynical way. And I actually think most people that would get in touch are not trying to do this as an insurance policy or necessarily to cover their asses. Maybe you'd go and get a bigger firm too if you wanted that. But it is sort of saying, look, this is a new firm. I'm the CIO, and people know me as making sure everything runs smoothly. I see the opportunity here. How do I bring a different voice or just a different view to saying what we're going to do? And it's not trying to say rubber stamp things. It's most people are sort of open to challenge around what they want to do, but it's also saying, look, I know this stuff. I don't know it as well. We do want to make these decisions, but we want sort of a bit more thought into it too. So I haven't seen anyone say, now this is the slide that you now need to stand in front of and do. But people can be quite open and say, look, we know that AI is going to change things, and we're trying to tell the organisation that. But we need someone external to come and help us. And I'm going to say, even on a personal level, I see sort of the challenge here. So I would say that, I meet a lot of tech people, probably, younger males, and I'm like, you don't have kids. And so you meet these people, it's like, of course, you've got time to be at the forefront of things. And then a month ago, I met this guy. He looked a lot younger than me, but was pretty much my age. He lived around the corner, actually, has 2 kids, spent pretty much the same time at McKinsey as I did in a very similar role. We're both sort of 15 months into starting our own business. And I was like, oh, we're the same. And just the way he used AI and was like really into it, I was like, oh, Claire, there's no excuses here. Up you go. And so I think sometimes, like, especially I work with a lot of tech-focused people, as well as people across the business. But I think there, in Australia in particular, there is a lot of people that look at someone who's in technology and says, I'm not really a techie. I'm not, I don't know this stuff. And use that as an excuse to not sort of be engaged in this area. And I think when it comes to AI, that's not an excuse. Or, I don't have time because I've got lots of meetings each day. Well, probably still have time. And actually AI is going to be helpful for those, understanding what you have to do with those meetings and afterwards. So yeah, I think it's sometimes really good to have something reflected back to you as someone who's the sort of same as you, being able to talk to something or someone who's very different to say sort of like, here's another way of looking at it. Have a go.
And I think I think you're perfectly right. It is perhaps an excuse is unfair, but it is definitely a bit of a mindset challenge where we do generally in life make time for what we consider to be important. And then maybe there's that sort of question at the back of the head. If we're not making time for it, is it because we are too busy, or actually is it just not quite important enough to get up the list to be one of the many things we do in our day? And it's very convenient just to say, oh, lack of time, so many meetings, I'm time poor, I can't look into this, look, once we finish the end of year, I'll do the sign off on that, and then I'll have a look in August type thing. Always pushing it down the road.
Yeah, I definitely push it down the road. And then look, to be fair to most people, learning AI is probably not their number one way to spend a Saturday afternoon or their most important for work. But I think some things that are important aren't always like exactly what you want to do all the time. But this is probably something that in the world of work and the world of opportunities for yourself, you have to make the investment now for the future you to thrive. And it's even if you are like using AI every day, that investment in how am I getting the right context to get even better output from the tools that I'm using, that's the same. It's not the instant gratification part of using AI, but once you've spent the hours doing that, you've got to have some much easier output in the end. So like there's always this trade-off of how do you get those foundations right? And if you're in a business and you need to get your foundations of data and governance right, it's probably going to help you in the long term as well. So on every level, I reckon, Robert.
Yeah. No, look, I agree. And I think that, and I do sometimes wonder if there's not an age thing, I think age is the wrong term for it, but maybe a seniority thing in the sense that I find when I'm talking to people that tend to be quite strong adopters of AI, it's often because either they're new to industry or sometimes they might be new to a different industry. So, I worked in finance, now I'm in healthcare, and I feel that sense of regardless of my seniority or age, I'm always playing a little bit of catch up. And therefore, I've got that desire to invest the time versus, say, someone who's been in the similar-ish, maybe just pick on operations, an operations style role in healthcare for 30 years. For 30 years, I've never needed this. We've produced extraordinary things. And they've just been so long since they've been in an environment where they don't really know what's going on. It sort of feels like this new space and this weird investment for something that I'm the expert in. Whereas, do you sometimes see when people are shifting industries or maybe changing roles, there is that increased humility regarding what one doesn't know, and therefore that opens up the aperture on what are all the things that could help me, and AI is definitely one of them.
Yeah, great question, Robert. I think this is less about seniority and age. And to your point, it's the fact that someone has done some changes, and not even in the moment, but I remember my first change from consulting to industry, and I had been at McKinsey for 10 years, and just a new job, and realizing, and I still remember, like, wow, starting a new job is really hard. And there's so many things that are different. And I think people that have had more of that change, more of that ambiguity maybe in their career, or more of the need to adapt, are probably a little bit more open to trying these things and realizing, oh, actually, maybe this is something I have a look at. So that can be, I can imagine junior people feel the same as well. And I even reflect that it's very much a personality thing. So when I was at McKinsey, there was this very young Oxbridge educated guy, and I had just come back from maternity leave, and it felt like everything in sort of programming and data had changed. And he was just dismissive of things change. He's like, no, I'm always going to do it this way. And I was like, oh, no, you've got to change this. And it just showed me, like, age is not what's going on here. It's really, there is something around mindset and attitude, because it's not age, it's not necessarily education either, but it's that curiosity, willingness to sort of lean into the ambiguity and the change that can really help.
Yeah, that real, I suppose, the growth versus the fixed mindset.
Mm-hmm.
Is it a fixed set of knowledge and I already know it, so let's just move on, versus someone who goes, no, there's always something new under the sun. Let's push into that. And I think those growth pieces, in terms of as a mindset rather than actually as a productivity growth, obviously in this context, I always think is that very, very interesting space when you're working with people that are endlessly curious. And I think that curiosity both makes the day more enjoyable and, in pure efficiency terms, I think makes the organization more effective.
Yeah, that curiosity. I feel there's endless bounds for it at the moment, and how do you contain that? Because I see a lot of people with great curiosity and willingness to try and learn. And I think some of the research has sort of said, actually, people who are using AI are more likely to get to burnout, because there is so much more you can do. It's like, oh, it's just going to be a little bit more. But actually, I reckon that cognitive overload is quite high as well.
I think that's definitely true. I sometimes find myself at 9 or 10 o'clock at night going, let's just try another query, just because it won't take that long, and suddenly 2 hours have gone by and you've gone off down a rabbit hole, versus, I suppose in the non-AI world, this will take several days. Okay, time to call it, let's go to bed. Whereas because some things do happen a lot quicker, but still the review time, the cognitive load, the context switching, the deep thought that has to happen as one reviews and then refines outputs, that's there. But occasionally it can feel like it's no longer a cost, even though it still is.
That's a great point. Yeah. And all those parts around content switching and sort of finding where you're going to spend your time, because it feels at once productive, but at the other time you're like, oh, have I finished this piece yet?
Yeah. And also what, working with AI is a little bit like when I find I'll do a big room planning session or sit with a wider team and we've got a problem and we start kicking it around in the room and the Post-it notes just start flooding the wall, and you realize when you get this many different minds working on something, all of these avenues that left alone, I would not have thought of them all, but now suddenly they're all surfaced. And I think that is one of the challenges working with AI, is that if it's helping you write a report or a slide deck, it starts surfacing all of these wonderful little avenues, and that can be challenging. What do I filter? Interesting though this is, and how do I keep to that really germane core column of what needs to be done?
Yeah. That becomes where that leadership part, and actually where the work is to be done. Like, there are all these 10 different things. Are they actually all the same importance, and what's going to matter to the company?
Yeah. And that, I guess, does look at the bigger questions that often sit as organizations approaching AI as either a productivity tool, a growth driver, maybe a way to reimagine the business. Do you see any trends emerging, or is it just such a diverse market still that it's too simplistic to try and put things into camps like that?
I think like lots of people talk about productivity. and these efficiency gains. Part of me, there are efficiency gains to be had. However, the size of the prize there is going to be a lot less than what you can do in terms of growth, and taking some big bets. So I think there's really this portfolio approach that people need to have of actually, okay, where do we get comfortable and start using some of this for productivity gains? Because the everyday AI tools, they can be helpful. And if you think about what are those key use cases that you can get people comfortable with, then they're going to be, okay, this is how AI works. I do need to review it. I need to get involved. So that when you go to something bigger and sort of a bit more complex or a bigger bet, that actually when you've got these different tools or ideas, people are more open to like, oh yeah, okay, I see where this could be wrong. I know what I need to check. I know what works and where I can be more confident. So I think you need to have both. And I think people will be asked to do so much more with their time. And so helping teams understand, how do I get ahead or around some of this work using AI will be incredibly helpful. So I see a lot more focusing on the efficiency. And I was speaking to someone yesterday who was like, oh, will you build an agent on just to make this more efficient? And all I could think was, there's so much opportunity to use AI on the upside. What? Just get another person to do the process. So, and I must admit, I challenge myself on this all the time. It's like, where do you prioritize your effort in terms of, hey, this is going to make things easier in the long run, but maybe not great dollar value now, or do you go for sort of more growth early on?
Yeah, the efficiency one is, I think, very interesting. I mean, I think the phrase, you can't cut your way to success, has been around ever since the dawn of business. Yet I do find it so fascinating that for every person in an organization that will know that mantra, as soon as they go to AI, it's almost, but hang on a second, efficiencies, this is what it does. And it's sort of, but sorry, if you're just trying to reduce your team size, in a sense, the old school of cut your way to success, that doesn't work. The technology hasn't particularly changed it, because it's a much smaller step change for the organization to save on a couple of salaries than it is to 10x your client base, and therefore the offerings that you're producing, which will inevitably, even with AI, require a lot more staff. And that growth piece is far more compelling, because as you said earlier, it's a much bigger prize to go for.
Yeah. And so I definitely agree with you on that. I think the one thing that I'm now sort of thinking a bit more about is, when do you go for the efficiency gains? What sort of points you in that direction first? And is it as actually, one, we need to get some foundations for growth for our back office operations, or is it that we need the team to get comfortable with it, and actually this is one where we can learn in low risk? And I think that is probably a good one to go, a good reason to do something in that space, because eventually you will need to update, like to make your back end processes more efficient and look at those efficiency gains. But I think you shouldn't do that at the cost of looking at sort of the more interesting and growth parts. But I also think on the growth side, it's harder for people to see what there is to do there. What could we do? Because it's going to be something different a lot of the time. At least with efficiency, it can be like, oh, I've got that process, I'm going to automate it. Well, and you shouldn't just automate the process you've got. You should think about, do I need that process? What is that process? And let's make it better before I automate. But I think on the growth side, it's not necessarily sort of putting in a well-known playbook. It's, oh, actually, is there a different way I offer my services? Is there a different way I get seen? And that's a different creativity that maybe, AI is not going to help you find. And you can't go into chat to make my business grow. How can I do this?
Exactly.
Because it hasn't been done before. So, but I think that area will continue to grow, and is probably places that companies need to think more about.
Yeah. And that I guess almost brings us full circle to the sense of those who have the growth mindset. They look at a problem and instantly just formulate 3 different ways they might be able to solve it. Maybe all are wrong, but their brain just functions that way. Versus I think those that are a little bit more fixed, and perhaps it's sort of maybe that's the divider between those that are more of that fixed mindset, maybe slightly more sluggish to adopt AI. But if I'm going to, okay, well, I understand my processes, I understand where a headcount might be saved, because frankly, Steve's a bit lazy and he never really does much anyhow. So let's try and automate his role. And I guess it feels easier. So it seems like low hanging fruit. And maybe that comes back to the risk piece that I know was spoken about a lot in board circles. And it still is. I know it's a great blocker, but I certainly know the earlier conversations were, but what are the risks to the business with bringing in AI? A new business model and growth opportunities, we've no idea where those are heading. But the idea of right-sizing our staff headcount, well, it's still kind of the same business we know and understand. So 1 or 2 people less at front of house or in an accounting function, we feel comfortable with that. It feels low risk. Do you think perhaps there's a bit of a risk appetite driving some of the approaches to what people are seeking?
I think there's definitely a risk appetite in terms of where people want to start. To be fair to many of the organisations I've seen, I think they also see risks in using this to cut staff, and very, very rightly. Actually, a few sort of say, I want us to become more efficient, but this isn't about cutting roles. This is about saying, how do we grow with the staff that we have, the team members. So I think they almost see this, they see the risk on the culture and the psychological safety of employees, and want their team members to know that. But they're also saying, well, can I start with something internal that will help that will be less risky from a sort of customer point of view, and help us learn. Because I think no company wants to be on the front page of like, what have you done, sort of thing.
No, that I think is the great fear. You don't want to turn up there. And I'd like to pick up on that point. I think that staff development, staff growth piece is one of the more beautiful areas that I'm seeing AI used in the sense of, Robert, you've got your 40-hour week. You spend about 10 hours doing relatively routine tasks. Judicious and effective use of AI is automating large parts of those tasks. That's now freeing up 10 hours. And, you said you were really interested in product management. Why don't we look to sort of see if we can use that time to start to shift you into that role and start to take on some of those responsibilities? So I think there are some really interesting ways, I think, in which staff can create the space in their week for either personal learning and development, maybe to take on other responsibilities in the organization as they automate the more mundane and the routine.
Yeah, I think you're right, Rob. I think a lot of organisations have a long way to go before they can have those conversations, because it's almost a conversation 2 months before that of, what can you use AI in your role for? What would you do with that extra time if you had it? Okay, let's get started. What help do you need to get started on this? And I worked with a team last year, and one of the goals was, okay, we'll have AI in some of our processes. And the person in charge was like, yeah, I'll get to that. And then after a few weeks, they're like, no, you're not even getting to that. So let's sit down and map out where it's going to make most sense. What are all the processes you've got? Where do we think we could look at it? And let's go and choose one. And you know what? Let's go and do that. Create that tool for you. And she could create it herself, but actually, having the 5 hours in a week to go and sit down and create it, and even having the permission, she's like, oh, is it okay that I spend a couple of hours on this? Like, yes, you'll need to spend more than a couple of hours on it. And you asked it the first week, oh, I don't feel productive on this. But by the third week, it's like, oh, and now I do this and I do this, and I can give it to the rest of the team. And so I think there's a lot of conversations that need to happen before it's, oh, now I've got all this time. And you've got to be sort of careful because, oh, you've got 10 hours back in your week. And here we go, Robert. Here is like another 25% of someone's work.
And
real
work I
balance.
didn't want.
Yes. I think it is a more of a 3-month sort of journey to go from, okay, let's get into this to, oh, I've now got more space in my day, and things are operating well as well. And I think one of the parts that are going to come up for an organisation is how much do you have someone across? I mean, it's
Yeah.
good to have things automated, but can you remember or be across when something goes wrong? And can you see the drift in the models and the output, and like how you keeping on top of that, and how are you maintaining things? Because this isn't a one and done. A lot of the things, especially as models change, the output will change. But even without that, the more use the output changes as well. So there is the maintenance part, which is going to come up again and again.
And oh gosh, so many really interesting things to unpack from that. That was first, I think I'd like to press into a little bit was I feel there's a bit of a takeaway of a conversation with your boss piece, in the sense of often in organizations there's a bit of a feeling that AI is a bit of a top-down thing. We need the board to agree on the risk profile. We need the CEO to say, right, we're going to be becoming an AI first organization, and the CTO to dash off and pick an AI tool. But I'm wondering if there's a lot of work that needs to be done from the, we'll call them more rank and file employees up, in the sense of, okay, let's imagine a future state where this has come in, wonderful efficiency savings, everything's great, little utopia. But as you pointed out, what are you going to do with that time once it's freed up? And is it just freeing up your time to give you more, I call it junk that you really wish wasn't on your plate? Or can you frame that as a personal development opportunity with your boss in your one-on-ones by saying, I can see some efficiencies, I'm starting to use AI and work out ways to save. Here are some things that I can see creating value for the organization that I'd like to be working on next. So rather than just being a very passive receiver of AI, you start to become a bit more of a driver. And I guess that's an interesting informal leadership option maybe for staff.
I think that is a great idea. And I actually can imagine staff being a bit nervous having this, because if I say that I'm going to save this much time, am I actually saving this much time, and how much work am I now open to?
Yep.
So I imagine people are saving time and then just sort of holding back. But I think it's worthwhile having a conversation both with your boss, but also at a team level, to say, what are we going to use AI as a team for? And what are the expectations on us all? Because yes, it's great that people use AI, but when you need 3 bullet points and someone gives you 3 pages, that's not fair on the rest of the team either. And what are the expectations in terms of quality, what areas you can use it for versus what you can't use it for, what you definitely should use it for. So I think there's probably a big conversation, both boss and team member, but wider, like your sort of team that you work with day to day, around how you're going to use it. And then you all get on the same page. There's a little bit of peer pressure to make sure that you are using AI properly, and you lift up your skills. And one of the best things about AI is that everyone uses it differently. So by talking about it more, you find out, can I do that? Can I? And I never thought to use it that way. So yeah, it is probably more on the positive side to have that conversation with your team.
Yeah, I'm certainly seeing a bit of a step change. I remember when smartphones first came out, the buzz around the water cooler or around dinner parties was very much, what apps do you use? Now I think it's very much, well, how are you using AI? And it's sort of interesting to see that social community growing and that interpersonal learning that goes on as part of the process.
Sorry.
And also I think the volume piece is a really good one to pick up on, because I definitely see a bit of a risk of, to your point, 3 bullet points would have been ideal. I produced 3 or 30 pages. I've now produced so much volume that the person reading it doesn't have time to read it. So they now use AI to process it to turn the 3 pages back into the 3 bullet points. But then it pops out another 3 pages in return. And then we've just got people endlessly feeding it into the system rather than having those conversations and having that tighter review. And then to your point, if something does go wrong, how across the subject matter am I to retrieve it and to bring the ship back up to level again?
Yeah, I don't necessarily have a solution to this other than, acknowledge when it happens. And I like even personal AI use, when I use my own work and research, part of it is sort of, oh yeah, okay, I've got 3 pages here I now need to read, but can I write down by myself the 3 points that I want to talk about or that I need to know, and then can I fact check them as well? What other sort of paper would this come from? I feel for many leaders who get in that position and have a team that are trying to do the best they can, but probably aren't thinking through what they're sending back. And now there's just mountains of everything out there to sort of read, consume, and then synthesize back down. So again, ways of working with your team, I think, is what's needed.
Yeah, no, very much. And I think that synthesis piece is a good one. I mean, I always know one of the tricks for reading a book is when you finish reading the book on the flyleaf, for those that still read physical editions, jot down 3 key things that you took away from the book, or 3 important learnings, or just whatever it happens to be. And that's sort of a good way of sort of getting the book in your head. And maybe that's a similar practice for AI. Once you've produced a report or a slide deck or something similar, without looking at it, can you distill what are the 3 key themes, and could you unpack them a little bit if you needed to? Because I think that confidence does everybody well when it sits underneath your role. And that I think maybe comes to the broader psychological safety piece, which I think you might have alluded to a little earlier, of people that have actually found 10 hours in their week through using AI, but they're a little bit nervous about mentioning it because, maybe the organization seems to be on a headcount reduction bent. And if I'm saving all this time, maybe I'm actually making myself redundant and next thing I'm out of a job, or, I'd like to sort of take on more interesting work, but I just get worried I'm going to be given more of the junk that no one else wants to do. But because I'm being so efficient, let's send it across to Robert and he'll just sort of grind through it, and it's sort of more of the mundane. So maybe there is that piece for, without the leadership, both in formal and formal underpinnings, without the psychological safety, organizations are going to struggle to maximize their value that they're extracting from AI, because there is always that fear of what's next. And we need to have a certain degree of comfort about the unknown or the ambiguous to really be dynamic and innovative in those spaces.
Yeah, definitely agree with everything you've said there, Robert.
Amazing. Well, as we're starting to draw to time, because I think you've been very generous with your time this morning, thank you. I want to move into a bit of a lightning round if we can. First is the most overused word in AI right now.
You? Agent.
Agent. Well, yeah.
Agent.
Everything is agentic. If it's not agentic, then what are you even doing? Do you even do AI? I feel there's a bit of that going on. The one question you wish more boards would ask their executive about AI.
Are you using AI day to day, personally?
I love that one. That personal accountability, I think, is so often missing in those conversations. My team is brilliant with it. Have you logged in? And finally, productivity, growth, or reimagination. And I'm thinking more for yourself and for Cambiq this year. Do you think you'll be striving for productivity, growth?
Growth and reimagination.
Marvelous.
Definitely.
Marvelous. Look, Claire, this has been a really lovely conversation, enlightening as always. I adore our chats together. So, Clare Kitching, on the subject of leadership, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks very much, Robert. It was great fun.